one of the questions we got asked the most often was, how do you do this show? How do you do the show 8 times a week? How do you do the show 2 times a day? And we really didn't know in a way. I mean, we just sort of did it. It was incredibly rigorous, and it was incredibly physically rigorous, vocally and emotionally. So it was like full out every night.
Broadway actor Anthony Rapp. Today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. By the time he was 10, precocious actor Anthony Rapp had already made his Broadway debut. That was in 1981. Now, over the next 15 years, Anthony Rapp built up an impressive acting and musical resume. And then in 1996, he got the role of a lifetime. He originated the character Mark Cohen in the smash Broadway hit Rent. Now, along with that personal success, however, came personal tragedy, because Anthony Rapp's mother was dying. The two of them had always been very close, and losing her was devastating. She died in 1997. A couple of years later, Anthony Rapp started writing a memoir of him and his mom, Broadway, Rent. It took him 6 years to finish it, but the book finally came out in 2006. It was called Without You. And I met Anthony Rapp when his publisher put him on a book tour. Our conversation was frank and emotional and moving. And you'll hear it in just a moment.
Over a 30-year span, national radio personality Bill Thompson did over 10,000 interviews with people who had a hand in shaping our culture and our society. Here is one of those interviews. Enjoy.
So here now from 2006, Anthony Rapp. What made you decide to write this book?
I was approached by a wonderfully visionary, young, enthusiastic publisher named Rob Weisbach, who had he had his own imprint at William Morrow at the time, and he was doing the beautiful coffee table book of Rent, which people who are fans of Rent heads affectionately refer to as the Rent Bible. And as he was working on that book, he asked me if I would think about writing something, and not necessarily about Rent or about anything in particular. He was just interested in me as a person, and if I had a point of view about something or want to write about it. His father had passed away from cancer when he was in his mid-20s, and my mom was very near the end of her life, and we started talking about that, and he asked me if I would consider writing about that. And then as I said yes, which I said yes immediately. I mean, I've written since I was a little kid. I just had never tried to write a book. And now I see why, because it's very hard to write a book. But it became very clear very quickly that there was no way to separate my story of my relationship with my mother and her passing from Rent, because it all happened at the same time, and Rent is so much about that anyway. And Jonathan Larson, who wrote Rent, died at the same time. I mean, I was being faced with death in a way that I never had been before, and I felt like I learned some things from it. And as Rob pointed out, there's very little literature, especially for young people, that are about the loss of a parent. So there were a lot of reasons why, and then it just took a lot longer and a lot more effort than I ever would have anticipated.
This is kind of a sweet kind of amalgamation of stories. I mean, this isn't, as you said, it's not just about the play, although you'll learn a great deal about what went on. I love reading the kind of behind the scenes where you can smell the grease paint kind of stories.
Right.
That's one thing. But then it's the book of loss, and it's just, I can't imagine what you must have been going through to have this incredibly high period of your life. You're on Broadway. You're in a hit show. The President of the United States is coming to watch you.
Yes.
But your mother's dying. I mean, to be yanked in two completely opposite directions like that.
And she was my biggest supporter, probably my biggest fan, my biggest supporter. She took me around to all my auditions when I was a kid, and she had dreamed of that kind of success for me. And so she was enormously proud and enormously happy for me, and she was dying. And she knew that she was dying, and she was a nurse, so she understood all of the physical things were happening to her body. She was very pragmatic about it all. And she was like, please, I was like, what do you want me to do? She's like, go be in the show, do the show, be in New York. But at the same time, I wanted to be home, so trying to balance all that. Yeah, it was very challenging.
But it's also interesting to see how your relationship changed and evolved in the closing days of her life, as you were able to maybe talk about things, or at least talk about things in a different way than you'd talked about them before. Yeah,
I mean, we came from a family that was pretty quiet about a lot of things. And then every once in a while there'd be like a little minor, not even a blow-up, that's saying too much, but like an event would happen, we'd sort of confront it briefly and sort of have it out maybe for a brief conversation, then leave it alone and not revisit it. So yeah, in the last months of her life, we talked through some things. And she I think that, I don't know if it's that when she was facing her own death, she didn't want to leave anything unfinished behind. She did her best to leave things complete as much as she could. And I think that she also sort of let go of some of the things that she had held on to, and that's also part of what I wanted to honor in the book. Is I just think it's sort of remarkable how she went about saying goodbye to people and trying to
on her own terms.
On her own terms, yeah. I think she sets an example in that sense.
I guess if there is a positive side to a death you can predict, at least that might be it, that you've got some time.
Yes, I do think. I mean, the waiting is incredibly difficult, and watching her fade is very, very hard. At the same time, yes, I'm so grateful that we had that time. I mean, and as I've in the 10 years, it's now almost 9 years since she died. We were really becoming adult friends, which is, I think, what happens to children. That there's a point where it's truly like parent-child, and you're subordinate, or you look up, and then there's a period of like trying to break away and cut the apron strings and become your own person and become independent, and then we were coming back together, I think, as peers more, as adult friends, and that was really starting to happen, and that's the thing I miss the most now in the years since, is that we can't build on that.
Well, it sounded as near the end as though she was beginning to confide in you in ways that maybe in shades of subtlety that maybe she didn't think you could handle when you were younger.
Yeah, probably. And I probably wasn't open to it in myself, or maybe I wasn't asking the right questions or whatever. I think we found a common ground.
But as you said, I mean, it's difficult for anybody who's in any ordinary occupation, even a plumber, an architect, to handle his mother dying. But now you're in a show. Now this is a very demanding occupation.
Yes, especially rent is very demanding. It was kind of like being an athlete. I mean, I've never really been a professional athlete, but
you're probably in good enough shape to be.
But now, especially from doing shows like that. I mean, 8 shows a week, 1 day off a week, sometimes 2 shows a day. I mean, one of the questions we got asked the most often was, "How do you do this show? How do you do the show 8 times a week? How do you do the show 2 times a day?" And we really didn't know, in a way. I mean, we just sort of did it. But it was it was incredibly rigorous, and it was incredibly physically rigorous, vocally and emotionally. So it was like full out every night. It was very demanding.
Well, and aside from that, it's not the kind of job where somebody else could just easily step in and do. I mean, you have an understudy.
Right.
But people who pay their good money to come see the show, they came to see you, not the understudy. Yeah,
and I took great pride in missing very few performances. And although then, in the week that I went home to see my mom right before her death, the producers were, they were always very understanding about all that. They were like, "Please do that," and in fact, they even gave me a paid leave, which they're not at all obligated to do. So that was incredibly generous on their part.
I gather that this was probably one of the most rewarding show business experiences you've ever had.
Yes, by far. I mean, I've been working since I was 9 years old, like a quarter of a century now, which is weird to think. But no, I mean, to have, sometimes you're working on a job and it's fun and to go to work, but you're working with a great group of people, and that's what the joy of it is. Sometimes it's the material that's wonderful, and maybe you're not as close to the people off stage, but it still is great to be a part of something really cool. And then sometimes it's just a nice paycheck. Well, in this case, all 3 of those were true, and on top of it, it was a culturally significant piece of work that was making a difference, that was expanding the conversations that were happening in the media, in people's lives, and the kinds of feedback that we continue to get now 10 years later, especially now that the film is out and new people are even discovering it. It's continuing to have this legacy of making a very profound and personal impact on people's lives in a way that most entertainment doesn't. It's not to denigrate entertainment. It's just not all entertainment is really, that's not necessarily the goal.
Oh, but I mean, there's lots of shows that have very, very catchy tunes, and there's lots of shows that have very witty dialogue and snappy, but there's something almost alchemical about bringing all of those elements together, plus a star cast at just the right moment in history. That this really was a product of its times. This was it was destined to be.
And in a way, I think it was part of the Clinton era. I mean, there was the whole atmosphere was about sort of things opening up and expression and self-expression and cultural diversity and all of there was this kind of hope and I mean, I know that it's not entirely rose-colored glasses period of history, but at the same time, there was so much of that's my memory of that time, and now things have sort of squeezed down a little bit again, and in the wake of the terrorist attacks and things, people are the conversations are much more sort of about fear and war and danger and all that, and that was not the case then. So I think that it is also, I don't know that it would have had the same impact today.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, if you tried to do it 10 years earlier, during the Reagan administration, maybe not, I don't know. After this short break, Anthony Rapp explains why he believes in karma.
AI is not just for 22-year-old coders. A lot of us older adults are drawing on our life experience to find unique and creative ways to use AI, at home or at work. Got an AI success story you'd like to share? Tap the link below to visit our YouTube channel, AI After 40, and let's keep learning together.
Now back to my 2006 conversation with Anthony Rapp. Now, I don't want to get too cosmic about this either, but do you think this is a role that you were destined for?
It seems something like that because, it's not something that I would have... People always ask me, what are the kinds of roles you want to do in the future? And I'm like, well, if you'd asked me before this if I would like to play a documentary filmmaker, making movies about his friends who were dying of AIDS, and it's a rock opera, I never would have said that, and yet it's turned out to be the most significant experience of my life. So yes, I mean, I think something led me to that. I was really struggling at the moment that I got Rent. I'd been working, like I said, since I was 9, but at the moment of getting it, I was working at Starbucks, which was my first and only survival job I'd had to have since moving to New York. Now, if I'd had any of those other jobs that I'd gotten close to being cast in, I wouldn't have been available to do Rent. So, maybe things conspire.
The stars align.
Yes.
You're not a religious person, are you?
Not particularly, no.
So, but I mean, do you ever feel like there is, though, something out there that is kind of steering, guiding, maybe helping you make those kinds of decisions?
I guess the closest I come to is some sort of karma. Some kind of energy finds its own path, or I don't know, that thing, people sort of, the water rises to its own level. There's sort of some sort of natural order. I mean, I do think that Jonathan Larson and I were kind of kindred spirits in a lot of ways, and Michael Greif, the original director, I think we share a lot of passions and points of view, and then the rest of the members of the original cast. I mean, for 15 very divergent experiences to lead us all to that moment, and to get along as well as we got along, and for ego not to get in the way. I mean, it's rare.
And you really end up spending more time with them than you do with your own family.
Yeah. Yes, you do.
So they almost become your family at some point.
Yes.
I mean, you write with great sadness in here when one cast member departs.
Yeah.
You think, oh my gosh! I mean, it's like your sister leaving.
Yeah, it is. No,
leaving the family.
It is, especially with something like this where it was so linked to Jonathan too. I mean, it was an impossible situation when he died. It was crazy, and when we all came together to continue doing the show, it just brought out the absolute best in everyone, and it fused us together with a bond that's unshakable. And when somebody, when a piece of that is finally, the first person to leave that unit, that's the end of an era. I mean, not to be hyperbolic, but it just is. I mean, it just, again, in a sort of physics sense, it is,
Yeah, but it's almost like that moment when you're at the party and you realize everybody's been having this really great time, and one person excuses themselves to go, and you realize, all right, the moment is over. We'll still have fun here, but the moment is over.
Yes. And then that opens the door, and now people leave.
You do have this delicious scene in here with the president and the first lady and Chelsea Clinton showing up, and you're going through metal detectors as you're going to go backstage to get ready for the show, and you expected just a quick grip and grin afterwards.
Yes.
And it was a little bit, apparently the president had more in mind than just a grip and grin.
Which was very meaningful to all of us, and we like to believe it's because they like the show. I think that's, I mean, why else, I don't know.
Well, president's a busy man. He's not going to hang around if he's got someplace else he needs to be.
Exactly. So, and then a few years later when we had our 5th anniversary benefit concert, Chelsea was an honorary board member, honorary chairperson of that benefit, and she came to the performance and to the after party. So we knew that she was a renthead at least, or at least a minor renthead. But yeah, no, Mr. and Mrs. Clinton were wonderfully warm with us and lovely, and they spent a very long time on stage talking to us and taking pictures, and it was really cool.
Now, how much of your did you decide of your personal life that you wanted to share with us in the book? I mean, you didn't have to tell us all this stuff. Well,
I just, for better or for worse, maybe I'm stupid, but I just feel like I don't really have anything to hide, and this notion in our culture of grief, I think, is so limited in the normal discourse that it's, usually people just talk about it in terms of, you get sad and then you sort of get over it. And I think that's generally what people really most openly talk about is the sadness, and certainly that's part of it. But there are other thornier things that come up for most people in the wake of profound loss, and I wanted to include some of that to be a kind of a mirror and give people permission to recognize those parts of themselves. We're all human. We all have these things in ourselves that can come out when push comes to shove, and push definitely came to shove in my case. So.
I'm guessing that a fair number of people, they read your book and then they come up to you and say, let me tell you about my mom or my dad.
They have, and that was certainly one of my hopes, but it's been even beyond anything I ever would have hoped for, is the kind of feedback that I've been getting. And and I had somebody say, there's an episode of violence in the book where I really essentially kind of lost control, and somebody came up to me at a book signing. She's like, I just want to thank you for writing that, because she's like, I had a moment like that in my life, and now I know I'm not alone. I mean, that's the reason I wrote it. So I'm grateful.
So have you become emboldened now to write a second book?
Yes. I mean, yes, absolutely. Like I said, I've always written since I was a little kid, but the idea of a book, I just never thought that I could actually finish it. No, I have a novel idea that I'm taking notes on.
Excellent.
And teasing out. So
excellent.
It's going to be a little lighter. There's a section of the book that's a little lighter in tone where I'm playing spin the bottle and stuff. And there's that kind of voice is sort of more what I used to write. When the subject of the book is a little more somber, but that kind of voice is what I'm probably more comfortable in overall, and so. I think the thing I want to write next is going to be more along those lines, have that kind of rhythm to it.
Now, after his Broadway success, TV viewers will also recognize Anthony Rapp for his 7-year role on Star Trek Discovery. He is now 54 years old. You can get your copy of Without You by Anthony Rapp by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you can also hear my interviews with 2 other Broadway giants. My 1993 conversation with Marvin Hamlish.
I had just done The Way We Were, and I was offered less money to do the Sting. And my agent said to me, gee, I hate for you to take less money. And I said to my agent, I'd do this if I had to pay them.
And my 1990 conversation with Richard Adler.
There we were on top, Adler and Ross, about the biggest team in the country, or maybe in the world even. Suddenly, I went from being an exclamation point to a question mark.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, to mark National Radio Day, my conversation from 2013 with one of the nation's most popular disc jockeys, former Chicago, Philadelphia, Toronto DJ John Records Landecker.
In Chicago, there were only 2 radio stations playing anything that resembled rock music, and they were both on the AM band. So that was the choice that you had as somebody who wanted to hear the hits.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.